worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon.
Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My job is to be present.
The human cost is right here.
And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing.
I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. This is CNN.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Right next door in the situation.
Happening now, China's military is mobilizing after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi lands in Taiwan, defying Beijing's threat of retaliation. We are tracking this risky test of U.S. relations with the communist regime. And also this hour, new images show the hideout where al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed by a U.S. Hellfire drone strike. Stand by for new details about the high-stakes mission to finally take out the world's most wanted terrorist. And CNN has learned that the Pentagon wiped the phones of top defense officials at the end of the Trump administration, deleting any texts from key witnesses to the events surrounding January 6th. I'll get reaction from a member of the January 6th Select Committee. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. Wolf Blitzer is off. I'm Pamela Brown, and you're in the Situation Room. And we begin with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's controversial trip to Taiwan and the added strain it's putting on already tense U.S. relations with China. CNN's Selena Wang has our report from Beijing.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi staying overnight in Taiwan, ignoring relentless warnings from Beijing that there would be grave consequences. Speaker Pelosi touching down in Taipei just before 11 p.m. local time, becoming the most senior U.S. official to visit Taiwan in 25 years. But the high-stakes, high-risk visit also comes at a delicate moment for U.S.-China relations. Speaker Pelosi expected to meet the Taiwanese president and members of parliament on Wednesday. In an op-ed, she wrote, "We cannot stand by as the CCP proceeds to threaten Taiwan and democracy itself. By traveling to Taiwan, we honor our commitment to democracy." Taiwan's presidential office said it experienced a cyber attack on its website just hours before Pelosi was expected to land, temporarily knocking it offline. State media reported Chinese fighter jets were crossing the Taiwan Strait as Pelosi was arriving. China's military said it's on high alert. And after Pelosi touched down in Taipei, announced a series of exercises and targeted military operations for what they say is to counteract the situation.
There's no violation of any sovereignty issues here. Her visit is very much in keeping with previous visits by congressional leaders.
A Speaker of the House has traveled to Taiwan before, and members of Congress travel there all the time, including several who have already traveled there this year. So for China to try to turn what is in the historical norm into a crisis, or to try to use it as a pretext for aggressive action around Taiwan, that's on them, and they would be the ones who'd be escalating.
Beijing responding furiously. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Pelosi's visit is a serious violation of the One China principle, and these moves, like playing with fire, are extremely dangerous. Those who play with fire will perish by it. The idea that Taiwan is part of the motherland is core to the Communist Party's legitimacy. Now, while Biden has not endorsed Pelosi's visit, she's getting bipartisan praise from lawmakers back home.
I believe she has every right to go, and it's been unseemly and counterproductive for President Biden and his aides to have publicly sought to deter her from doing so.
And Pam, according to state media, we're learning that late on Tuesday night, China's vice foreign minister urgently summoned the U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, to protest Pelosi's visit. He told the ambassador that the U.S. government should have stopped Pelosi from, quote, acting recklessly, and accused her of only doing all of this to further her political career. Pam?
Selena Wang, thank you for that. And now to another major story we're following tonight, the killing of al-Qaeda leader and 9/11 plotter Ayman al-Zawahiri. New information is emerging about the U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan that ended his decades-long reign of terror. Here's CNN national security correspondent Alex Marquardt.
We want to speak to the whole world.
Tonight, new revelations into the counter-terrorism operation that killed the world's most wanted terrorist. Smoke billowing over Kabul following the pinpoint strike on Ayman al-Zawahiri's house. The windows of that house blown out, but the structure intact. Evidence of the care that was taken to avoid collateral damage. Aside from Zawahiri, U.S. officials say no one was hurt or killed. Today, the BBC visited the house, now draped in a green covering. The al-Qaeda leader, the White House said, was killed on the third-floor balcony.
In this case, we used an unmanned aerial vehicle with missiles, obviously, and 2 of those missiles were fired at Mr. Zawahiri while he was outside on that third-floor balcony. The president made it very clear when he made the decision that he wanted to make sure we avoided civilian casualties, and we know we did.
Visual and other kinds of intelligence confirmed that, the White House's John Kirby said, but there is no DNA evidence of Zawahiri's death. The intelligence gathering and planning took place for most of the year. This Situation Room meeting with top national security officials was in early July, when President Biden was shown a model of Zawahiri's building. Confidence had grown that the al-Qaeda leader, who had a $25 million bounty on his head, had moved into downtown Kabul with his family. He never left the house, officials say, but his family's movements were tracked, and he was spotted on the balcony where he was eventually killed early Sunday morning Kabul time with 2 missiles launched by a drone overhead, known as Hellfires, a U.S.-made air-to-ground missile that allows for precision strikes. Zawahiri's last recorded message was just 3 weeks ago. He had become more of a spiritual figurehead than an operational leader of al-Qaeda. But his presence in the Afghan capital is evidence, the U.S. says, of the Taliban reneging on the deal known as the Doha Agreement, that they would not harbor terrorists in Afghanistan.
There were senior members of the Haqqani network who are affiliated with the Taliban who did know that Zawahiri was in Kabul. There may have been other members of the Taliban who did not know. We have already been engaged with the Taliban, and I'm not going to preview any further actions that we will take to ensure that the Taliban lives up to its commitments.
The Taliban has condemned the strike, but the Biden administration immediately held it up as proof that terrorists can effectively be targeted inside Afghanistan with no U.S. boots on the ground.
If you are a threat to our people, the United States will find you and take you out.
And we have just gotten new satellite images of the neighborhood in Kabul where Ayman al-Zawahiri was living. And Pam, these images really drive home 2 points. One, that Zawahiri was hiding in plain sight for the past few months. You can see that this was a very densely populated neighborhood. It's an upscale neighborhood. Before the NATO withdrawal, this is where a lot of Afghan elites were living, where there were embassies. Now a lot of Taliban leaders live there. And now, and you can also see how stunningly precise this strike was. You saw how densely populated that neighborhood was. And not only did no buildings around that house get damaged or destroyed, the house that Zawahiri was living in himself was not destroyed, just windows blown out, and as far as we know, according to U.S. officials, just Zawahiri who was killed. No one else killed or hurt.
That's remarkable. I remember when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, that was a big question. Will the U.S. still be able to do precision strikes like this? Clearly it was able to, but it also raises questions about terrorists like Zawahiri being harbored, getting safe harbor there in Afghanistan. Thank you so much, Alex. Let's break it all down with CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr, CNN National Security correspondent Kylie Atwood, and CNN White House correspondent Jeremy Diamond. So, Barbara, first to you, I want to talk about what's going on with China and Taiwan. What message is China sending with these military exercises around Taiwan? And is this just the opening salvo?
Well, the U.S. watching this very closely because there's 2 things here. There's what China is capable of doing and what it will do. So they want to watch and see just how close China comes to Taiwan's own airspace, their territorial waters, all of that. It wouldn't be the first time China's engaged in exercises in the region. They've been very aggressive in sailing their ships, flying their aircraft. But if they approach Taiwan, if they actually were to get into Taiwan airspace or Taiwan's territorial waters, that, of course, would be a very significant increase in their aggressive moves. So they will be watching all of this. The U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, very aware of where Chinese assets are and watching them around the clock, Pamela.
And Jeremy, I'm going to bring you in on this. How is the White House trying to prevent this from escalating?
Well, Pam, we really haven't seen a lot of saber rattling from this White House, and they've made clear that they are not going to engage in that kind of saber rattling. Instead, what they've really tried to do is to reframe this reaction from China, which the White House says is essentially an outsized and unnecessary reaction to a visit by the Speaker of the House, who, although this is the first visit by a Speaker of the House in 25 years, it's not uncommon to see U.S. congressional leaders visit, and the White House has said it's obviously not unprecedented given the last visit 25 years ago by then Speaker Newt Gingrich. The White House has said that they do expect to see additional reaction from China to this, not just what we've seen today, including flights by some of those Chinese warplanes over Taiwan's air identification defense zone, but they do think that there will be more. And I pressed the White House's Strategic Communications Director for National Security, John Kirby, on this today. He wouldn't preview exactly what he thinks China will do or how the U.S. is going to react, but he said that the U.S. remains prepared. Obviously, the U.S. has a lot of military forces in the region, but the goal here is to try and preserve some stability here, not to escalate this situation any further.
And Kylie, the White House today warned China not to use this trip as an excuse, as a pretext to ramp up its aggression. Is this a turning point in U.S.-China relations?
Pam, I think the answer to that is yet to be determined, frankly, because so far what we have seen from China in terms of actual actions in response to Speaker Pelosi's visit sort of fit into the bucket of their bellicose action that they have carried out towards Taiwan over the last few months and increasingly, of course, over the last few years. So if they go beyond that, that is what could turn this into a breaking point, a pivot point in U.S.-China relations. And we just don't know yet what else they have planned, because Speaker Pelosi is going to be on the island entirety for the day tomorrow.
And while we have you, Kylie, the State Department just issued a new warning on how al-Qaeda may respond to the U.S. strike that killed the top al-Qaeda leader. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this State Department warning is warning all Americans around the world that because of this killing over the weekend of al-Zawahiri, there could be the potential for increased violence towards American citizens, towards U.S. facilities. And in this warning, they are saying that it could take the form of actions such as hostage taking. It could take the form of kidnapping, suicide bombings, and the like. So they are warning American citizens around the world to be cognizant of that possibility in these days following that incredible murder that took out that terrorist.
And Barbara, what does it say, though, that not even a year after the U.S. withdrawal, the Taliban was harboring the leader of al-Qaeda right there in Kabul?
Well, a lot of people might tell you that both the Taliban and the al-Qaeda leadership made a serious miscalculation, that they thought the U.S., without boots on the ground, without troops, without manned aircraft, could not reach out and touch and prosecute a target. And of course, this mission proved to be just the opposite. This was a CIA drone. They were able to spend weeks, if not months, loitering. We don't know if they had help on the ground at that point as they were beginning to hone in on the target over the previous weeks and months. But they certainly had overhead drones, overhead surveillance, possibly even satellites. They may have been intercepting communications. So the real lesson here is they didn't actually need the boots on the ground. The U.S. had always said it would be difficult, but they could go against a target, a terror target inside Afghanistan, even without having soldiers on the ground there. Difficult, but not impossible. And of course, what this mission proved is that it was very possible.
Absolutely. Jeremy Diamond, Kylie Atwood, Barbara Starr, thank you all. And just ahead, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee gives us his assessment of Pelosi's trip and the potential risks for the United States. Senator Mark Warner joins us up next.
I think that there's an understanding that wellness and fitness and well-being is important in a COVID world. And that is certainly what we're seeing. Not only are we seeing a significant demand for membership across our estate, but we're also seeing an increase in usage, existing members using the clubs more. And that on top of hybrid working. You know, we've got lots of data that tell us that members are going to not go into the office as much. We're a suburban-based business. We're seeing people come and use the clubs differently. And that is all positive for us. So on the negative side, we've got an increase in the cost base. But on the positive side, we've got a greater demand for what we're offering. I think someone has to be absolutely committed to improving their mental and physical well-being. But we will hold their hand every step of the way.
When we decide we want to rise up and do something, when we come to connect with and care about each other, I think now I want to do something about what's happening with them and human trafficking around the world. My name is Sarah Davison Tracy. I'm an author, and I just published a book called No Longer Untouchable, a story of human trafficking, heroism, and hope. I wrote the book over the last 7 years in collaboration with 5 young women, 4 of whom were trafficked out of Nepal into India. Devi Sarahana Bhatti is one of our 5 storytellers. She has been a leader. She has been a visionary for this book, but also for her people in Nepal.
I have 1 brother and 5 sisters. One sister, she was sold out into brothels in India when she was very little. So it was very long time, my parents and we were looking for her. But there was a big challenge for us how to rescue her, how to, get her back to Nepal.
I wrote this book with the hope and the dream that these stories would elevate these young women's voices and would bring freedom to the many, many millions who are not yet free.
Transformation, technology, new Marketplace Europe.
From the meteoric leap of 5G to a deep dive into the metaverse, how Europe is investing in its telecom sector.
Marketplace Europe, Saturday on CNN.
China is flexing its military muscle in response to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's refusal to heed Beijing's warnings against visiting Taiwan. She is there right now, a move China sees as a challenge to its claim that Taiwan is part of its territory. Joining us now, Senator Mark Warner, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Hi, Senator. So China is reacting to the House Speaker's visit by flying warplanes and launching military exercises around Taiwan. In your view, do the rewards of this trip outweigh the risks?
Well, when the Speaker decided to go, I think if she had backed off, that would have simply encouraged the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping's leadership to claim a great victory. We have had congressional delegations go to Taiwan on a regular basis. And I think as she landed, she said this is no change in American policy. We have this kind of what's called strategic ambiguity around Taiwan, that we want to defend them, but we also recognize the one China policy. This is where it gets a bit more messy, but the fact is Xi Jinping has been extraordinarily aggressive over the last couple of years in ratcheting up pressure on Taiwan. One of the reasons why it was so important that last week we passed the CHIPS bill, the semiconductor production, so we can bring it back here to America. A lot of our cutting-edge semiconductor production is actually in Taiwan, and that is vulnerable to these aggressive actions from President Xi and the CCP.
So you mentioned that a bit more messy. So, look, you say her trip is, as she said, in no way contradicts the longstanding U.S. policy of ambiguity on Taiwan. But when you add this to President Biden's multiple comments earlier this year that the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily, are Democrats rewriting that policy here?
No, I don't think Democrats are rewriting that policy. Matter of fact, I saw a lot of my Republican colleagues who said they were using words that they don't normally use, that Speaker Pelosi is right. I think 25 of them even wrote a letter commending her. I think we have to realize that we are in a strategic long-term contest with China. Where I focus is mostly in the technology competition. Semiconductors, I think we will have the same kind of competition around artificial intelligence and quantum computing, synthetic biology, all areas, and who is most successful in this technology competition will dominate both national security and power-wise, but also economic-wise. And I think we have to step up and, frankly, rally democracies around the world, not just our traditional NATO friends, but countries like Japan and South Korea and Singapore and others against this kind of Chinese effort to dominate a whole series of domains.
But just before we move on, very quickly, yes or no, do the rewards outweigh the risks here? Yes or no?
Stepping back from this trip once it was announced would have been a mistake.
Okay. Turning to the U.S. strike that killed al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan acknowledged today that he, quote, wasn't involved in day-to-day planning. So how much does this strike actually degrade the threat from al-Qaeda?
Well, I think the world is a slightly safer place with taking out Zawahiri. I mean, this was one of the planners of 9/11. I think it sends a signal that if you brutally murder Americans or others, and al-Qaeda has done that not just in America, but many countries in Europe as well, we're going to get you. We're going to go after you, even if it takes 20 years. And I think, as one of your earlier commentators said, I think the Taliban leadership, along with some of these al-Qaeda leaders, seriously miscalculated that even though we did not have boots on the ground, that we could still strike into Kabul. And I think the American intelligence community, in this case, pulled it off brilliantly. I think they were able to take out the target without any additional damage. I think it was an extraordinary effort on their behalf, and I think it will at least put a pause. I know that the State Department has issued this warning, and I think we all need to be on guard, but we cannot be cowed by these jihadist terrorists, whether they be al-Qaeda, ISIS, or any other form.
All right, Senator Mark Warner, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Pamela.
And coming up here in the Situation Room, potential evidence in the January 6th investigation deleted. First, Secret Service texts were missing. Now we have learned that some Pentagon officials' phones have been wiped clean.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
I'm sorry you had to put up with your father's BS all your life.
I've had an investor tell me I can't finance your film because your lead is black. And that is even African American. Now you're talking about Africa. Just by saying Africa, the doors are shut. No one is interested because no one thinks you're capable.
You like?
Oh, Zumkita, it is a definite yes.
So when I started in the industry 10 years ago, I think the hard part of it was really coming into a very male-dominated industry. But I think it's changing a lot more. I think there was a recognition also from funding bodies that that was happening, and a lot of interventions were made to kind of change that.
I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front, tonight on CNN.
try to be global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria GPS, Sundays on CNN.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
I'm Patrick Ottman in Havana, Cuba, and this is CNN.
First on CNN, new information on the insurrection investigation. Court documents are revealing that the phones of some top Pentagon officials were wiped at the end of the Trump administration. That would include any text messages relating to the events of January 6. Our Kara Scannell is here with all the details. So, Kara, what are you learning?
Well, Pamela, we're learning today that the Department of Defense wiped the cell phones of several top DOD and Army officials who were leaving the Trump administration. That could, of course, include text messages relating to January 6th. Now, these are top officials, including at the Department of Defense, the former Secretary Christopher Miller, his Chief of Staff Kash Patel, the General Counsel Paul Nye, and over at the Army, the former Secretary Ryan McCarthy, his General Counsel James McPherson, and two current officials at the Army, the Chief of Staff James McConville and the Director of Army Staff Lieutenant General Walter Piat. Now, the thing here is we're learning this from this lawsuit that the government watchdog group American Oversight filed against DOD and the Army because they filed Freedom of Information requests wanting to obtain text messages, including communications with former President Trump, his Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and anyone else who is acting on their behalf. The big questions, of course, around January 6th is, did Trump try to get the National Guard to intervene? You know, people are looking for answers here. And the DOD is saying in a joint status report what their position is. And what they say is that DOD and the Army conveyed to the plaintiffs that when an employee separates from DOD or Army, he or she turns in the government-issued phone and the phone is wiped. For those custodians no longer with the agency, the text messages were not preserved and therefore could not be searched. Now, they say that it's possible that some of these records may have been maintained in emails. And for the two officials who are still in the Army, they said that they are looking through their records to try to find them. But it's the latest example of the government wiping devices when senior officials leave. We've learned this from the Department of Homeland Security. They wiped the devices of the acting Secretary Chad Wolf and his deputy Ken Cuccinelli. And the bigger questions about the Secret Service and their actions that day. So a lot of questions still here, Pam.
And it is notable that would take place, even if it is a routine act, after an insurrection, what happened on January 6th, where clearly there will be investigations. Kara Scannell, thank you so much. Let's get reaction to this new reporting from a member of the January 6th Select Committee, Representative Zoe Lofgren. Hi, Congresswoman. So what is your reaction to this new reporting that the phones of top Pentagon leadership under Trump were wiped, removing January 6 records?
Well, it's a tremendous concern to see these various agencies not living up to their obligation to preserve records. And especially, wouldn't you think on January 6th there might be something worth preserving and that we would want to know everything about it? And when it comes to the Pentagon records, we can't talk about our interviews, but Colonel Earl Matthews of the DC National Guard has publicly alleged that the generals lied to Congress and that the Inspector General's report was erroneous and misleading. I'm not saying that Colonel Matthews is correct, but obviously text messages and all kinds of evidence from the Pentagon would be very important in getting to the bottom of who did what and who knew what on January 6th.
Was the January 6th Select Committee aware of these deleted Defense Department records prior to today?
I do not believe so. I was not, which is another concerning matter, that this was not disclosed to us by the Department of Defense.
And you have interviewed some of these Pentagon officials. Can you tell us anything else that you have learned from them in terms of Donald Trump and his lack of action about calling the National Guard to the Capitol building that day?
As we showed at our last hearing, we had testimony, for example, from General Milley that there was the former president did nothing to contact the military about bringing in Guard resources. And as you know, the rules don't allow us to disclose testimony without the committee voting, but what we've displayed publicly made that pretty clear, I think.
I want to ask you about Attorney General Merrick Garland saying that the Justice Department would investigate Secret Service checks if there are criminal allegations. Have you seen any evidence of criminal activity here?
It's not possible for me to say at this point. Obviously, this does not look good. The department, the agency, was directed to retain everything in a letter sent by the chairman of the 4 committees with jurisdictions before the January 6th committee, told to retain everything. And 11 days later, they erased everything. So that is a problem. And obviously the committee is a legislative committee. We're trying to find facts. We don't do criminal prosecutions, but I think that this needs a thorough review. The one thing that this review should not do is prevent forensics from being applied to those phones to see if we can recapture any of the text messages. That's essential. And apparently the Inspector General of Homeland caused a halt to that, which was very distressing. And after not telling the committee for over a year about this entire debacle.
And I know that is something the committee is looking at as well. Representative Zoe Lofgren, thank you so much. And just ahead for you tonight, voters casting their ballots right now in key primary races, the latest test of former President Trump's grip on the Republican Party. The very latest on that up next.
I'm Mindy Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for a market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Today on CNN.
interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smirconish, Saturday on CNN.
Regenerative gastronomy is meant to transform. It's meant to heal. It's more about getting to know the cycle of life. We directly connect the guest with the heart of nature. In my kitchen, it's very simple because we created a restaurant in the middle of a forest, and we don't have a menu. We choose and we select the best products from foraging, from agriculture, from our artisanal fishing. The world is going after 20 types of crops, but there are 8,000 types of edible plants in the world. We're losing biodiversity, and of course I'm afraid. United Nations is telling us that there are 60 harvests left for us. We need to solve the problems. The solutions have to come from us. Gastronomy plays a big role in the good health of ecosystems. The more plants, the more climate-proof we are. The more resources we have, the more carbon we sequestrate, the more food we can get.
We're following high-stakes primaries tonight in 5 states where former President Trump's clout is being put to the test, and that includes Arizona. Top Republican candidates there are looking to win by peddling his election lies. CNN senior national correspondent Kyung Law is in Scottsdale for us. Kyung, Trump is looming large over key races tonight in Arizona. What are you watching?
Well, he's endorsed a full slate of candidates all the way down the ballot, starting with the governor, Arizona Senate, Attorney General, Secretary of State. But we are really keying in on what's happening with the governor's race. You have a proxy war here. The Trump-endorsed candidate, the election lie believer, Kari Lake, she is endorsed by Trump. She has leaned into the election lie, and in her closing message has not only talked about 2020, but she's now teeing up conspiracies about what might be happening as voters head to the polls today. Take a listen to what she said.
We're going to win. And if we don't win, she's going to win on. And we already know that. Every poll since I've been in this race has shown me ahead. And they want to cheat so bad. They don't want Arizonans to win. They don't want this country to survive.
You may have noticed that it's only if she loses that she believes that cheating may have happened. Something that, by all accounts, we're hearing from the Maricopa County Recorder's Office is not happening. It is going smoothly today at the polls across the county. There have been very few reports of any major problems. I want to turn to the U.S. Senate race as well. Trump has also endorsed Blake Masters. He is similarly embracing Trump's 2020 election lie and is also teed up conspiracies about what might be happening in 2022. But Pam, it's not just these top two races. It is all the way down the ballot. We will see what Trump's power here is in Arizona by end of day.
We will.
Pam?
We're watching it closely. CNN's Kyung Wah, thank you. Let's take a closer look now at more of tonight's political battles with CNN chief national correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics, John King. So, John, what are some of the close races you'll be watching for?
How much time you got, Pam?
All day.
All day. Look, there's a lot on the ballot. I make a joke about it because I love primary nights. But let's start where Kyung is, again, in the state of Arizona. I have the governor's primary map up right here. Think about the impacts of governors. Now that the Supreme Court says abortion goes back to the states, now that we believe the Supreme Court could send other issues back to the state. Arizona's key in 2022. It's also key in 2024. So Arizona, especially this governor's race, one of the races I'm watching tonight, as Kyung just noted, all the way down the ballot on the Republican side, you see evidence of this cancer. That's what it is. Cancer in the bloodstream of the Republican Party, saying elections are rigged when elections are not rigged. That is the Trump effect that you see playing out in a key state here. Again, one of America's new battleground states out there. This is also, as she noted, a Trump-Pence, sort of a Trump versus the establishment, with Mike Pence joining the Republican establishment battle. The governor's race there and the Republican nomination for governor also out here in the state of Michigan. Very similarly, Pam, there's many races to watch, but those are two of the states where you're looking at battleground states this year in governor's races, battleground states in the next presidential election, battleground states in every presidential election that we can see in the future. Does this cancer in the Republican Party continue to elect nominees? And then do Democrats, can they benefit from that? Or can those nominees actually win in November?
Yeah, and I'm glad you called it for what it is, a cancer that is spreading. 3 of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump are facing primaries tonight. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating test. Remember, after all the January 6th hearings, right, do we get any evidence that Republican voters, we're talking about Republican primary voters here, so do we get any evidence that Republican primary voters are now saying enough? Enough. I don't want to make this about Trump, and these guys were actually right. Imagine if the second impeachment had all the evidence the January 6th committee has put forward. You'd have more than 10 Republicans, most likely, voting to impeach. But 5 have already said, let me blank to get the marks out of there for you so you don't see them. 5, Tom Rice lost his primary. 4 others decided not to run. So there are 5 left in play. David Valadao, he won his primary, so he'll be on the ballot in November. Liz Cheney, that's the mother of all Trump grudge matches, if you will. That one's later this month. Today, 2 Republican congressmen in Washington State and 1 in Michigan who voted for impeachment. The odds are, Trump has endorsed their primary challenges. We know where the energy is in the Republican Party. But for me, Pam, the key test is, after hearing from the January 6th committee, as we get to this point now, do enough Republican voters say enough? They do not deserve to be punished, or do Trump's grievances carry the day?
We'll have to wait and see. I do want to ask you about what's going on in the Missouri Senate race. Former President Trump says he's endorsing Eric, but of course, there are 2 candidates named Eric. This might be a confusing stunt, but both candidates are running with it.
Stunt is a great word. It shows, forgive me if you're a big Trump supporter, how not serious he is, Pam, in the sense that he didn't want to pick, so he endorsed Eric. Well, Eric Greitens is the former governor of Missouri who resigned in scandal and disgrace. He now wants to be in the United States Senate. Eric Schmidt is the state attorney general. As Kyung was noting, both of them say there were issues with the 2020 election. So this is not a choice of an election denier and someone who supports election integrity. But Trump said either of the Erics there. The biggest story for me, Pam, is that we're talking about Missouri at all. This is a Republican-leaning year. This is a Democratic president's first midterm. This should be a very safe seat for Republicans. Democrats believe there's a possibility, it's slight, but believe there's a possibility that if the Republicans nominate the wrong candidate here, they have a shot here. In a 50-50 Senate, any opportunities Republicans give Democrats, they will be grateful for.
Turns out you didn't eat all day. Summed it up nicely for us. John King, thank you so much. Coming up, WNBA star Brittany Griner awaiting a verdict in her trial on drug charges in Russia. We'll go live to Moscow. And we're also standing by for a Senate vote on a bill that could help millions of veterans exposed to toxic burn pits.
I'm Ivan Watson in southern Ukraine, and this is CNN. So what's happened since the last time we were here in person? In Bank of America and colleague companies is the private sector has taken the field with force. So net zero commitments by companies in their supply chains, net zero commitments in how they run their operations, causes a series of activities that creates purchase power, creates business models, creates that. So the private sector from before COP26 through COP26 now have committed these net zeros. You can't change that. Will oil prices go up and down between now and 2050? My guess is it'll go up and down a lot here and there. But you can't change this basic commitment by these companies. I believe there's a transition project. I believe it has to be just transition. I believe the oil companies have to change. I believe the new energy companies have to change. Everybody has to work together. So it's a business thing that we can solve.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem.
Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, today on CNN.
We share this place, we all belong.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
Tonight, a long-awaited and very closely watched vote in the Senate on a bipartisan bill to expand health care benefits for millions of veterans exposed to toxic burn pits during their military service. CNN congressional correspondent Jessica Dean is working this story for us. So, Jessica, does it look like this bill is going to pass tonight?
Yes, Pamela, we do anticipate that this vote will pass. But of course, we never say done until it's done. And right now, the state of play is that you're looking live at the floor. They are on the third of 3 amendment votes. Once they wrap this one up, which should be momentarily, they're going to move to final passage on this bill. And again, we do anticipate that we will see a large bipartisan vote like we saw when they originally passed this legislation several weeks ago. It was then about last week, there was a procedural vote that they had to fix something in it. They had to do a procedural vote. That's when things got hung up. We saw this surprising failed procedural vote. Republicans holding this up because they wanted, led by Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, amendment votes. So here we are now. They have come to a compromise as a way to move this through. It's worth noting, Pamela, that Toomey's amendment did fail, so it will not be included in the final passage of this bill. And once we see final passage in the Senate, it will go to President Biden's desk. This is going to help millions of veterans who were exposed to toxic burn pits during their military service. It really expands health care for so many people out there who have struggled to get access to the health care that they need because of the service that they completed for our country, Pamela. And then on the horizon, it continues to be a busy week here. We're now turning our eyes to this Manchin and Schumer agreement, this all Democratic health care and climate and tax bill that they're trying to get passed before they go to August recess. And it's a real rush rush on that. Pamela, we now wait on the parliamentarian because it's a specific budget process they're going through, so she has to rule on that. We're also waiting on Kyrsten Sinema, the kind of more moderate senator from Arizona. She's yet to say exactly where she is on that. So all eyes remain on those two people as Democrats try to get this past the finish line before they head home.
Yeah, busy week on the Hill before August recess. Jessica Dean, thank you so much. And WNBA star Brittany Griner is back in a Russian courtroom today waiting for a verdict on the drug charges she's pleaded guilty to, while the Biden administration tries to negotiate a prisoner swap. CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleiken is in Moscow for us tonight. So Fred, what happened in court today and how soon could there be a verdict?
Well, it could be a verdict very soon. What happened today, Pamela, was that the defense actually called its final witness. It was an expert witness who testified and sort of cast some doubt in some of those early forensics that took place on those vaping cartridges that Brittany Griner has admitted to having had on her when she entered Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport on February 17th of this year, and then, of course, was apprehended by the police there. Now, I spoke to her legal defense team, and her lawyer told me that she believes that the next court date, which is going to be on Thursday, that's going to have the closing arguments, and there could possibly be a verdict on that day. It's not 100% certain yet. There's certain things that still depends on, but she says it's something that could happen. She also says that right now, Brittany Griner, of course, very focused on trying to get as lenient a verdict as possible from the court. Let's listen in.
She's still focused and she's still nervous and she still knows that the end is near. And of course she heard the news, so she's hoping that sometime she could be coming home, and we hope too.
They hope too. That is referring to a possible prisoner exchange. Now, of course, the U.S. came out last week and said it made a substantial offer to the Russians. The Russians, however, seem pretty irritated by that. In fact, today, the spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, he came out and he accused the United States of what he calls megaphone diplomacy, which he says would not help in this case. The Russians say they want negotiations like that to take place behind closed doors. So it's unclear whether those negotiations are moving forward, whether they're going on. One of the interesting things, though, that Brittany Griner's lawyer told me again today, she said she believes that a possible exchange would probably only happen after a verdict in Brittany Griner's trial. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens then. But certainly there is the hope on the part of her legal team and on the part of Brittany Griner that possibly she could be coming home soon.
All right. We certainly hope so. CNN's Fred Pleiken, thank you. And up next, the death toll is climbing tonight in the Kentucky flood disaster. But as the water recedes there, dangerous heat is posing a new threat.
Forced labor looks different in different countries and different sectors. My name is Jonas Astrup. I'm the Chief Technical Advisor for the ILO Third-Party Monitoring Project in Uzbekistan. And I've been based in Tashkent for the last 4 years. Uzbekistan is the 6th largest producer of cotton in the world, but the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan is the world's largest recruitment effort, with approximately 2 million people picking cotton every year from September to November. And ILO has been monitoring the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan for child labor since 2013 and for child labor and forced labor since 2015 under an agreement with the World Bank. We have witnessed incredible changes during that time. 2 million children out of child labor and 500,000 adults out of forced labor. We have seen wages increased by over 600%. We have seen the number of labor inspectors doubled and perpetrators punished. Forced labor and child labor is now a criminal offense in Uzbekistan. We've seen awareness raising campaigns to make sure that people are aware of their rights, and we have seen a liberalization and a privatization of the agricultural system. There's still work to do in Uzbekistan, but I think it's fair to say that Uzbekistan is a success story in the world of work.
There is nowhere in Lysychansk that's safe.
Let me show you what the scene looks like. It's absolutely obliterated.